Welcome to our YouTube channel at Brain Love Health. I'm Patrick Smith, the Chief Executive Officer of Brain Love. Today I'm going to discuss why Brain Love Health was founded, what our mission is, and how we believe we come up with methodologies that will help prevent cognitive decline and dementia as you age. Before I get into all those particulars, however, I would like to give you some background information as to how Brain Love Health evolved. Our work really goes back to almost 20 years ago. 2001, we serendipitously found some patients that were involved in some prostate cancer treatments. Now let me talk a little bit about that. There's a drug they use for prostate cancer that is designed to shut down the hormonal activity in men particularly and eliminate the testosterone, which is a risk factor for prostate cancer. They're taking a drug called leuprolide acetate, which shuts down the production of testosterone. We found a number of patients that were taking that drug. Serendipitously, their family members, spouses would tell us they have Alzheimer's disease, but since they've been taking this drug, it seems to be their memory and decline seems to balance out or get better. Well, this made no sense to any of us, and we started to investigate other ways in which we might be able to understand this potential opportunity. So in the context of that initial observation, we contacted a group, a very large urology group in the Northeast that was seeing hundreds and hundreds of patients for prostate cancer. We asked them to start observing those patients relative to their cognitive decline. Many of those patients also had dementia issues, not all of them, but many of them. And so over a period of a year, they started to look at the patients to see whether or not those patients that were taking this drug, leuprolide acetate, whether it had any effect on their cognitive decline. Well, after a period of a year, I believe we were able to observe about 65 different men, and we were able to see that yes, their medical charts and medical records indicated that their cognitive decline seemed to balance out, or not improve, but not get any worse. So we began to do some research into what might be the causative factor of this outcome. So at a medical conference in 2002, I was able to come across a number of neurology researchers. In more particular, I came across an individual by the name of Mark Smith, who at the time was running a neurology lab at Case Western Reserve University. In a discussion with Mark at that conference, he was giving a speech relative to the various pathologies that occur in Alzheimer's disease. And he indicated that there were multiple factors involved. He talked about cell division and cellular death. He talked about neurofibrillary tangles. He talked about beta amyloid plaques. He talked about oxidative stress and inflammation and glucose issues relative to the disease. And after his discussion was over, I approached him and indicated that we had observed some things in some patients that were taking this drug leuprolide acetate for prostate cancer, and there seemed to be some mitigation in their disease process. So Mark and I and some other physicians that I was involved with basically discussed with Mark ways in which we might test this hypothesis. The hypothesis being, Mark believed that cell death and cellular division in the brain was leading to cognitive decline and the downstream pathologies of neurofibrillary tangles and beta amyloid plaques, inflammation, and oxidative stress. And he believed there was some stimulus occurring that was causing neurons to die. And that was the question. We proposed that perhaps It's the changes that are occurring in midlife in the hormonal structures in men and women that were driving the neurons to die. Consequently, Mark said to me at that point, that's easy enough for us to test. So we looked at the mode of action or the method of how the drug leuprolide acetate worked, and we found that the way it works by eliminating testosterone is by shutting down the HPG axis, the hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis. And that's just a very complex way of saying by shutting down that hormonal system, that endocrine system, we were able to shut down the production of testosterone. So we thought at that point, perhaps there's something in that drug that is affecting the HPG axis, and is it the HPG axis that's causing the problem in the brain to begin with? So we decided to do some experiments at Case Western Reserve. At this point, we were also talking to other researchers around the country. And at Case Western Reserve, Mark came up with an experiment where they would put the various aspects of the HPG axis, meaning luteinizing hormone, follicle stimulating hormone, estrogen, and testosterone on neurons and see if that had any impact on the behavior of a neuron. So in the next months, we did these experiments and we found that there was no impact from estrogen. We found there was no impact from testosterone when it was placed on the neurons. And we found there was no impact on the follicle stimulating hormone. But a very interesting aha moment came out of the luteinizing hormone tested experiment. What we did was we put luteinizing hormone on neurons, and after about a day or two of being in the experiment in a petri dish, the neurons, we were able to see massive explosions of cellular division in the group that was getting luteinizing hormone. Now, this was an aha moment because up until that point, it was believed that neurons were terminally differentiated. By terminally differentiated, that means neurons evolve in your youth and into your childhood, but once neurons are formed, they typically do not divide for the rest of your life. And think about how the brain is working. Neurons are terminally differentiated because they're making different connections to each other as you learn, as you grow and progress in life. And those connections are what send the signals of memories and all the other things that drive the function of the brain. So it makes perfect evolutionary sense that neurons wouldn't divide, because if they divide, those connections that have formed over many years would be broken. So that was the prevailing thought of neurons and the way they worked and why they were designed the way they were evolutionarily, and they're not supposed to divide. So it was extremely peculiar that when we put luteinizing hormone on neurons, they started to divide. Now, what happens when a neuron divides? Typically, it goes through a process called apoptosis. Apoptosis is a process in cellular division where the cell cannot complete the division. Now, why aren't they able to divide like that? Well, they're not able to divide because they don't contain a microscopic cellular component called centrioles. Centrioles are what allow cells to divide in what drives the cellular division process. So essentially what's happening here is the luteinizing hormone was stimulating the cell to divide, but when neurons try to divide, they die. Now let's go back to the beginning. One of the hallmark issues associated with Alzheimer's disease, dementia, and other cognitive decline issues is the fact that there's abnormal cellular division occurring in the brain. Now remember what I said, neurons aren't supposed to divide. So when they do, it causes them to die. Now, does anyone see that as a problem? We essentially identified the one hormonal component that was causing neurons to try to divide, And we believed, and we then did subsequent research for the next 12 years, we believe that that is the triggering point in which the neuronal activity that leads to cognitive decline starts to cascade. We believe the cellular division stimulated by an increase in LH, and I'll get to that in a second, is driving neurons to divide, which then leads to inflammation, leads to oxidative stress, which brings up the proliferation of the beta amyloid plaques and the accumulation of the plaques, and drives a process of neurofibrillary tangles by basically breaking up the infrastructure of the neuron, causing them to get all tangled up, which then shuts down the ability for the brain to send signals and be healthy the way it's supposed to be. The other thing that's occurring as that process is moving in through its process is essentially you're starting to lose the microglia, which are the garbage men, lose the astrocytes, which are the cleanup mechanisms of the brain that allow the brain to clear itself as it needs to. And so you see this absolute downward cascade of events that essentially we believe is and science would back up, is being driven by abnormal cell division. Now, let me take a short break. What's causing this abnormal cell division? What's causing this to happen? I mentioned earlier there's some issues associated with the HPG axis. The HPG axis, the hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis, is part of your hormonal system that drives growth and development throughout your life. The HPG axis is driving your growth and development when you're a fetus, when you're in utero. It drives growth and development when you're going through early childhood into adolescence up into reproductive years, and it stays with you through those reproductive years. However, at the point in midlife, when you reach andropause and menopause, what starts to happen is the HPG axis becomes dysregulated. Now, why is it becoming dysregulated? It's becoming dysregulated because it's designed primarily for growth and development. And when you reach the point of midlife, things start to change. Now, I don't need to educate anybody on what's changing in midlife. We all see it. And what's driving these changes is a change in your hormonal systems. It's the hormonal balance of the HPG axis that's driving many of the issues and symptoms that you go through as you reach middle age. It's driving the symptoms of increasing your weight. It's driving the symptoms of brain fog. It's driving the symptoms of many of the things you go through as you age. Now, how does the HPG axis work? It's designed to be a feedback loop that is driven by the brain, the hypothalamus of the brain. And the hypothalamus in your brain stimulates a hormone called gonadotropin releasing hormone, which then stimulates the pituitary to produce FSH-LH, the luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone. Now, when that occurs, the luteinizing hormone talks to the testicles and the ovaries and tells them to either make sperm or to make the sex steroids, or to make the ovaries produce an egg. Now, when that occurs, the ovaries produce an egg, they release estrogen, they release progesterone, and these then talk back to the hypothalamus, and as long as that feedback loop is working properly, everything works perfectly well. So the same thing occurs in men. Once the men produce the testosterone from their testicles, it then talks back to the hypothalamus, and the hypothalamus stops producing the gonadotropin releasing hormone, and the system works very effectively. Now keep in mind, this is a feedback loop. The brain stimulates one thing down to the next, talks to the ovaries and the testicles. They then release testosterone and estrogen, talk back to the hypothalamus. And the system goes on like that for many, many, many years. Now, what happens in midlife? In midlife, that system becomes dysregulated. It breaks down. Now, how does it break down? Essentially, what's going on is as we age, men are unable to produce the testosterone they were when they're younger, and that's a gradual process. As women reach midlife and they start to hit premenopause and menopause, they have less eggs, and consequently, the feedback loop becomes broken. Now, when that feedback loop becomes broken, the brain doesn't like that because the brain's designed to keep the reproductive process going at any cost. That is part of how the HPG axis works. That's part of human evolution. It's actually part of evolution of all organisms, is to keep that reproductive process going. When that no longer can occur, there's a breakdown in the HPG axis, and the brain's not getting the signal it wants. It's not getting the estrogen signal. It's not getting the testosterone signal. And therefore, it starts to produce more and more of the gonadotropin releasing hormone because it really wants to maintain that process. So it doesn't get the estrogen, the testosterone, because there's no eggs and there's less testosterone in men. And it keeps producing more and more gonadotropin releasing hormone. And that then stimulates more production of FSH and LH. And so it keeps going up. The LH and the FSH keep going up, because they're not getting the feedback to the hypothalamus that it wants. Now, what does this mean? Why is this important? It's important because a lot of attention in aging issues gets focused on testosterone and estrogen. But the LH and the FSH really doesn't get a lot of attention at all. Now, why is that important? Well, if you look at any cognitive research on cognitive decline and dementia, you'll find they talk about estrogen. There's books about estrogen being a problem in midlife, estrogen being a problem in the symptoms of menopause as you age, and so on. It's definitely an estrogen issue, but they're not studying the effects of LH on the process. Remember, the estrogen's going down, but the LH is going way up. Now, our research from back in 2002 and 2003 that I mentioned earlier by Mark Smith at Case Western Reserve and Dr. George Perry and Gemma Cassavetes, who happened to be Mark's wife but also a brilliant scientist, that work suggested that it was LH that may be causing neuronal cells to divide. And if that's the case, is LH the problem? Now, many of you probably realize from reading issues related to dementia and cognitive decline and Alzheimer's disease that essentially the focus has looked at all the different things like beta amyloid plaques, neurofibrillary tangles, estrogen depletion, inflammation, oxidative stress. Those things are all true and they're part of the disease process. But the root cause is the dysfunction of the HPG axis. And we need to study and we need to find ways in which we can balance out the process of what's occurring as the HPG axis becomes dysregulated in middle age. That's the root cause right there. All these other things are part of the problem. They're downstream to the actual event that's causing the problem. So what does this mean for the future? Well, what I can tell you is this. Brain Love Health has been studying this now for over 20 years. Myself and others, my partner, scientists from around the world are agreeing on one thing. And the agreement is it's unlikely that beta amyloid plaques are the root cause or the issue that it's going to address and cure the disease. Now, first of all, I don't believe there's going to be a cure for the disease because, like I said, there's too many factors involved, too many issues related to the endocrine system that are affecting the brain. So we believe that prevention is the cure for this disease and this problem as you age. It's the only thing that has been shown to work. It's the only thing that has been shown to slow the progression of the disease. I like to say this all the time, but aging is not a disease. Aging is normal. And the dysregulation of the HPG axis is normal. So we're not trying to suggest that you have to cure the disease as much as we believe prevention is the right approach to this. Now, how does prevention come into play, and what in the heck does that have to do with brain love health? Well, what it has to do with is during the process of understanding that dementia and cognitive decline is multifactorial, we were able to determine that the research being done, all the money being poured into clinical trials was coming up with nothing effective. Now keep in mind, the issue related to clinical research is always based on funding. In the 2005 period, beta amyloid and tau phosphorylated proteins became the primary issue of research and drug development. And why was that? Well, that actually dates back to 1906, when Eloisa Alzheimer's identified in a 50-year-old woman, I forget her name, Auguste, identified in her a frontal lobe dementia, which is basically a clogging up of the issues in your brain and in your frontal lobe. So he observed, and he was a neuropathologist and a psychiatrist, and he observed these clumps of things in her brain when he looked at her neurons after she died under a microscope. And ultimately, they called it Alzheimer's disease. And so to this day, we call it Alzheimer's disease. I personally believe cognitive decline and dementia is not a disease, that it's actually a normal process of aging. But anyway, that's where we are. They love to name diseases because it brings a focus to it, I guess. But ultimately, I believe dementia and cognitive decline is normal. And it's going to happen to all of us at some point if you live long enough. Now, there are pockets around the world where it doesn't occur, and I will talk about that in subsequent YouTube presentations. But let's go back to the whole issue of Alzheimer's disease. So from 1906 up until 2005, the primary focus was to look for ways to solve the problem of these clumps or plaques or these tangles, how we could get rid of those in the brain, because that was the primary focus. But it wasn't studied to figure out, how did those get there? Why did they get there? Now, I liken that a little bit to the fact where you all know that if you cut yourself and you don't put antiseptic on it or keep it clean, what ultimately happens? You get an infection, and the infection starts to get all full of pus and get red and cause all kinds of things. I look at this the same way. The root cause is driving a process of creating the beta amyloid plaques in the neurofibrillary tangles, and therefore I believe you have to start addressing the root cause, which I believe is hormonal imbalances in midlife. And that is the mission of Brain Love Health. Now, I've been studying this for over 21 years. I'm not the most brilliant scientist in the world, and I don't talk in the scientific jargon that you might be used to. I try to bring it down to a layman level in a way in which people can understand it. Why do I do that? I do that because my experience, my career, my profession has been as an executive running companies that solve problems. My goal is to not what we call slice the bologna so thin and analyze every little aspect of every little detail of every little thing. My approach is to solve problems, and that's what I've been doing my whole career. So I know a lot about this topic, but I don't talk in the scientific jargon of a researcher or a scientist, because that's not my background. My background is marketing, business and healthcare and pharmaceutical development and pharmacy services, but I know how to run companies and I know how to solve problems. So that's what I'm trying to do here. I firmly believe, and the science will back me up, that nothing we've done to approach the problem of dementia and cognitive decline has worked. Nothing has worked. And I don't see anything, and I look at this every single day, that would suggest we're any closer today than we were 25 years ago. Because they're looking at the wrong issue. There's been studies done, and you've probably heard all about them, where they found this new drug, it gets rid of the beta amyloid plaque. Well, guess what? There's been numerous studies that show that gets rid of the beta amyloid plaques. But guess what? They don't help with cognition. So we've been able to figure out how to get rid of beta amyloid plaques, but it doesn't help with cognition. It doesn't improve the problem. Why not? Because the beta amyloid plaques are downstream to the root cause. Now, let's get back to the root cause issue. We must prevent the problem from occurring. When you get to the point where the disease is now symptomatic and you're having cognitive issues, your memory's poor, you're starting to have decline, it's too late. You now have to treat the symptoms, which is exactly what you're going to be able to do, is treat the symptoms, but it's not going to improve anything. It's not going to stop the disease from progressing. So that's our approach. The approach of Brain Love Health is to stop disease from occurring. Now, that doesn't mean in every single person that's going to occur, but keeping your brain healthy is no different than keeping your body healthy, no different than keeping your heart healthy. The way to do that, as many of you already know, is you have to eat the right foods. You must exercise. You must have healthy relationships. And you must have proper sleep. Of all the things we've identified in our research, sleep may be the most important thing. Poor sleep in your 40s, 50s, and 60s will increase your dementia risk by 50% in your 70s and 80s. So you must find ways to relax and sleep better. You must find ways to eat better food that are full of the nutrients that we have studied and we will share with you over the next months and years that will keep your body healthy long term. But more specifically, we've studied the nutrients that are designed to help your brain function long term. We've designed nutrients and have found supplements that will allow you to keep your brain healthy. It will allow you to keep your heart healthy. It will allow you to keep your microbiome and your gut healthy. These are all interrelated. But most importantly, our approach is to figure out ways to balance out the hormonal changes that occur in midlife in order to stop that increasing level of luteinizing hormone, which we believe is deriving the erroneous neuronal cell division, which leads to all different kinds of dementias. Now, one of the things I didn't talk about is the multiple dementias that occur. There are multiple kinds, as many of you well know. There's frontal lobe dementia, there's Lewy body dementia, there's Parkinson's disease, there's Alzheimer's disease, there's cerebral vascular dementia, and all those are interrelated in some form, and they affect people differently depending upon whatever genetic makeup they might have. It might make them more vulnerable. Now, some of them are more aggressive than others. Frontal lobe dementia and Lewy body dementia are very aggressive, and they typically occur at a younger age. The other important factor to realize is that the different types of dementia affect men and women differently. Men seem to get Lewy body dementia, frontal lobe dementia, and Parkinson's disease more than women, almost to the fact of 2 to 1. I believe it's hormonally based, but we don't have all the answers relative to that. Women get Alzheimer's disease, dementia, and cognitive decline more than men 2 to 1. And I believe that's related to the hormonal changes at midlife. By hormonal changes at midlife, women change more abruptly than men at midlife. Their hormones change much quicker over a, say, 5, 6, 7 year period, whereas the hormonal changes in men and the HPG axis is more gradual. And I believe that would attribute to why women outnumber men in in the Alzheimer's group. I don't have the answers on Parkinson's disease and Lewy body and frontal lobe. Some of the issues have been related to head trauma, which might suggest why men have it more than others. I've just recently talked to some caregivers whose father had frontal lobe dementia, and he played football in high school and college and took tremendous hits to his head during that period. But I don't know that we have all the answers to that. We just have statistics at this point. But I believe what it all comes down to, whatever dimension you're dealing with, in order to prevent the problem from occurring, it can be addressed from a prevention standpoint, and it needs to start in your midlife. It actually needs to start probably in your 20s, but at the same point, you need to really get serious about your prevention issues in your midlife. You need to eat better food, whole food, food full of the right nutrients. And there's a whole list of nutrients, vitamins, and minerals that we will share with you that we've actually researched over many years that show these particular nutrients will affect the outcome of dementia down the road. It has to do with the Mediterranean diet, it has to do with the mind diet, it has to do with specific vitamins, minerals that have been shown to reduce inflammation, reduce oxidative stress, and also, by the way, many of the studies that we did early on in the 2000s showed by lowering the level of luteinizing hormone, you actually stop the progression of beta amyloid plaques and tau fibrillary tangles. So this is real science. This is real stuff that has been developing over many, many years. It's different than the approach that the pharmaceutical companies take. And remember, I was a pharmaceutical executive. I ran a pharmaceutical company that was developing a drug for Alzheimer's disease and invested $85 million of money in the process. Unfortunately, we didn't come up with a solution, but we did come up with this research that suggests we're on the right track. In the last couple years, I've become a student and a admirer of functional medicine and functional integrative nutrition as a methodology to prevent disease. And that's now the approach I believe in and take. And I believe, and I conclude today's discussion, and we're going to be back with more of these all the time. I just wanted to give you an overview of why Brain Love Health is here, and we invite you to follow us and understand what we're saying about the topic, and we hope that you've benefited from some of the things I've said today. You can reach out to us at any time. Find us on our website, brainlovehealth.com, or follow us on Instagram and Facebook. We post information and studies and things we find out about every single day, and we invite you to look this up. But reach out to us, the info at Brain Love Health. And again, I'm Patrick Smith, the Chief Executive Officer of Brain Love Health, and we're here to help. We're here to help keep you healthy into your later aged years, because prevention is the way to do that. And I'm passionate about it. I'm committed to it. I've devoted my career and my life to this prevention process, and we invite you to be part of our community, and please let us know what you think. Thank you very much.